I'm with DataBank CEO Raul Martynek, and we're talking about the data center industry next. Well, Raul, thanks for joining us today. I'm really excited to get to talk with you about the industry, and I think this is a really exciting time in the data center market.
Absolutely.
The last few years, the growth. When we started DataCenterHawk in 2014. I don't think I anticipated as much growth as there would be, and it certainly has been fascinating to watch. So I'm excited to get to talk to you about it. I think first what I'd love to dive into is just your history in the IT space.
Sure.
You've been in this business for a very long time. So would you mind just walking through how you got into the data center industry, and then how you ended up as the CEO of DataBank?
Sure. So been in the space kind of about 20 some odd years, kind of from the advent of the internet.
Okay.
This all started with telecommunications,
Sure.
right? So I got in 1995, and back then it was really about kind of wireline services and adopting internet access. So built a Northeast CLEC, as they were called at the
sure.
time.
Yeah.
Between 95 and 2007, it was a business that was called Info Highway. So that was kind of in the bubble years and then post-bubble years, which obviously were not a fun period of time in our sector. And we sold that business in 2007. And that's kind of when I decided, I want to stay in the sector, but I don't want to be in wireline, because it really felt like, a big melting iceberg, which it still is to this day. And then I pivoted into other kind of areas that I thought had more kind of long-term potential. So I ran a fiber business in Ireland, actually, for a couple of years, and we sold that to a business that eventually sold to Zayo. And then in 2009 is when I got more kind of formally in the data center cloud space.
Okay.
Ended up running a business that was headquartered in New York, but had a global footprint. It was a complex managed hosting business called Voxel.
Okay.
Great business, great technology platform.
Yeah.
At a really interesting time, kind of before AWS was like a dominant player,
Okay, sure.
before Azure.
Yep.
So during that period, kind of the whole cloud, game was was open, and no one was really sure who was going to be the winner there. Anyway, we sold that business in 2012 to Internap, which, as you know, is a public data center operator in Atlanta. And then from there, I ended up running a data center business in New Jersey called NetAccess, which we sold to Cologix in 2015. And then I got the Digital Bridge. And, throughout that time, I think what's allowed me to go from, business to business is just, these companies all consume a lot of capital. You start to obviously get to know kind of the capital players in the industry. And, as being the CEO, that's one of your big roles is, making sure that you have good investors. And, really that's kind of how I've gone from opportunity to opportunity is through, the relationships that I have with the private equity players and that invest in this sector. So that's how I got the Digital Bridge in 2015, who is a great group, because it's the first time I've been with a group that is only focused on kind of, as we call it, mobile and internet infrastructure, with kind of like-minded people that also have a long tenure in the space. And eventually we acquired DataBank in 2016, and then recently became the CEO of that company. Yeah,
well, I think one of the things that's interesting in the space in general, especially as that's changed. I mean, you think about how much it's changed in the last 5 years, let alone the last 25. But it's always interesting to me, leaders that are able to see where the market is going and really try to understand the trends and be with companies that are kind of on the leading edge. And it seems like you've certainly done that. Where do you feel like, one of the questions I like to ask people that are leading companies is, what have been your biggest influences along the way? So are there, when you look back at your 25-year career, are there people that you go, hey, when I was at this company with this, whether it was a COO or something like that helped me think about the business differently, or helped me realize what the opportunity was? Who or what were big influences for you?
Yeah, no, listen, I think that's a key part of growing as a professional is, meeting mentors, right? And I've been fortunate to have probably at this point 5 or so different mentors who I can remember looking back and seeing kind of a step function in my knowledge around certain things, right? So when I got into the business in 95, it was a bootstrap business. It was a guy I knew who kind of started it with his 401k money and took a 50% pay cut to go there, and it was kind of learn everything from the ground up. He was an incredible salesperson and sales executive, and that was kind of a thing that he taught me that I didn't have in my repertoire. And when we raised capital, we ended up bringing in some investor groups. One of them was Lazard Frere out of New York. There was our board member there, Russ Planitzer. He was kind of the first kind of really professional board person that I worked with. He had been the CEO of a couple Fortune 1000 companies, so kind of really helped me think through how to think about a business strategically. And I remember when I took over as CEO of that company, he would call me like every week and just check in and what challenges are you having, and always offered great advice. Someone that I still twice a year grab breakfast or lunch with. So I think that's kind of how at least in my case I've been able to cobble together this knowledge set that I have. I mean, some people go through one company for 25 years and kind of get to that same point. I've taken a more kind of eclectic route, and it's been fun because in my view, kind of going from these different business models really forces you to kind of think outside your comfort zone, learn new things. I remember when I got to Voxel, it was a very technical organization. I was 10 years ago, and everyone in the company was like 25 years old. And I remember being at the first management meeting, like, what the hell are these people talking about, right? So, and having to then kind of adapt and learn that. So it's worked for me, and have no complaints about that. And one thing I definitely continue to do is seek out situations where I can learn more.
Yeah, well, it's interesting too because I feel like leaders, especially in our space, which is this mix of the technology side of things as well as the commercial real estate side, but you have to kind of keep a learning hat on, because if not, the space, the industry will pass you by. And I think that has helped companies like DataBank and others to continue to evolve to meet the needs of the users.
Yeah. Look, this sector, as I mentioned, you really can kind of pin it down to, that mid 90s period when it kind of started, right? I mean, ultimately what's propelled this whole sector has been kind of the internet, right? I mean, there wasn't a real kind of commercial internet in 1995. I mean, I used to go around New York City convincing people they wanted to buy internet, and they'd say, get out of my office, right? So how amazing that only 20 years later we're at this point, right? But the adoption of that technology platform to solve all kinds of business needs has then kind of spawned these other industries. It spawned the fiber business, right? Because you wouldn't need fiber to communicate over a phone call, right? That was well established, and for 100 years you had phone businesses, and there really wasn't a lot of innovation there, right? So that spawned the wireless, the fiber business, and then obviously wireless had a huge amount to do, and that was a whole new kind of paradigm. And this whole data center stuff has really emerged out of kind of the adoption of the internet as a platform for commerce, for entertainment, for education, for really everything. I mean, at Digital Bridge, we call that, the internet of everything. And that ultimately we believe that, we're still in the very early stages of kind of a multi-decade trend towards the adoption of that technology platform to really permeate every sector of society, every sector of human life. And as that happens, you're going to need more infrastructure. So that's really kind of our thesis in a very simple statement, which is, that is going to result in more wireless infrastructure, towers and small cell, more fiber, and then hence more data centers.
Yeah, well, it's creeping its way into just every part of our life. I was at a meeting the other day and we were talking about, instead of dad scoring baseball games, like we're doing it on our phone on apps. And, just the whole world is changing from the way that we used to do, traditional, whether it's business practices or, B2C type of things. And now it's done, with a technical platform. And that's really interesting. So when you think about DataBank, you've been there now for, about a year, leading the charge. If you could drive one value into the company, into the company's DNA, what would you drive? What would be the one value you would want the company to stand for?
Yeah. So look, it all starts with, your relationship with your customer. I mean, every business I've been in, at the end of the day, our sector it's a great sector, but it's also highly, highly competitive, right? And ultimately, no one person has a product. It's not like the drug industry where someone comes out with a patentable product and they end up having some advantage that other ones have. Here, we love the way we build data centers, but I have to be kind of self-aware that other people make great data centers too, right? So ultimately, when you're in that type of business, which I think is what wireless is, and wireline, and data center, and cloud, it ends up coming to that customer experience. So one thing, we drive very, very deeply in our organization, in our culture, is that attitude towards the customer, and that it has to be the best experience out there. And, everyone says they're very focused on customer service and making sure their customers are taken care of. But, the reality is, as you well know, as, being someone that knows what's going on behind the curtain on certain of these companies, there's companies that do it better than others. So our view is, if you can couple, obviously, a great product with a kind of great service organization, then that is what leads to kind of greater than average market returns, right? That's how we create alpha, as we say. So that's kind of what the focus is. And, DataBank, when we met the company, we could see that it had that in its DNA already. So it's not something that we had to turn around because those things happen too. Exactly. How do we scale that from, 3 markets to more markets? And, and today we're in 8 markets, 12 months after we made that acquisition.
Well, so, I think one of the interesting parts about the market, I think that's changed in maybe the last 24 months has been some of the demand drivers that have been pushing, activity in from a geographical perspective in different markets, but also in your business. So being in the amount of markets that you're in, what are some of those demand drivers you all are seeing today with, maybe current customers that you have that are expanding within your premises already, which I always think that tells a lot about a business, that current customers want to continue to grow, but then also about, new customers coming in that have never done any business with DataBank before and kind of what that looks like. What are demand drivers that you're seeing?
So with DataBank, I mean, we're slightly different than a lot of the kind of data center companies out there. If you think about the data center development, it kind of started in about 5 major markets, right? Which happened to coincide with the major nexus points of the global internet, right? So most data center construction that started in, that 2003, 2004 post-apocalyptic, bubble era, right? Started in Ashburn, in the New York metro market, in Chicago, in Dallas, in kind of San Francisco area, right? So, and those are the markets that, have been, flourishing as this kind of global internet continues to grow. With DataBank, what we saw is, there's obviously this concept called the edge, right? And ultimately, when content was not so voluminous, you could kind of service all your end users from a couple locations in America. But what's definitely happened over the last couple of years, and why we really like the DataBank profile, is that what these kind of cloud and content guys are starting to see is that they can't just service their end users from 5 locations. They need to be in 20 locations or 30 locations. And it's that kind of, kind of that spread and the need of content to be closer to the eyeball or closer to the end user that's driving growth. So when we saw DataBank as a company that, kind of similar to that evolution, it started in Dallas, had built up a good reputation and a good base of business in Dallas, but their next market wasn't Chicago.
Right.
Their next market was Minneapolis, right? And then their next market after that wasn't San Francisco, it was Kansas City, right? So when we kind of looked at that that kind of strategy, and we looked at the growth that they were able to do that, because the other dynamic is in those markets, which is probably not unexpected, they tend to be, they're not the early adopter markets when it comes to technology trends, right? So the tier 1 markets, the enterprises had outsourced first, and the secondary markets, they're kind of they're coming around to that idea. So there's a kind of latent demand there on the enterprise side. So we really like that dynamic. And then obviously since then we've expanded to Salt Lake, to Cleveland and Pittsburgh, to Atlanta, and then most recently to Baltimore. So again, we're staying kind of true to our secondary market strategy there. And what we see there is, again, there's there's still a lot of latent enterprise outsourcing demand in those markets.
Yep.
And then number two, we're starting to see that the larger cloud and content players recognize that to service the 2 million people that are in the Kansas City MSA, it doesn't make sense, kind of given the number of applications, the amount of content that they're driving, to do that from Chicago or from Dallas. It makes more sense to forward deploy some infrastructure in that market and be 10 milliseconds away from everything in that market. So those are the trends that we're seeing, and in those markets, we tend to show up and try to go deep, build very high quality facilities, build multiple facilities so that, we can kind of stand above the competitive landscape there.
Yeah, I think one thing you hit on, talking about enterprise demand, and, sometimes, this is my opinion only, but we talk so much about cloud and how organizations are adopting cloud that I think we can forget that there are still organizations that haven't even adopted co-location as a solution yet. And so, not saying that they won't bypass co-location, but do you see that or would you agree or disagree that the industry, that there's still a lot of demand sitting in on-site premises with?
It's unquestionable. I mean, we obviously follow these statistics very closely and work with outside groups to help us validate what we're seeing. But the numbers we see is that around 65% of enterprise infrastructure is still owned and operated by the enterprise.
Yeah, so there's a huge opportunity there. Yeah,
right. And in terms of that question, which is, I call it the one ring to rule them all question, which is, does everything become public cloud?
Sure.
Obviously no one knows the answer to that, but if you look back at the history of kind of this sector and then before that, kind of the computer sector, it just seems like no one dominant philosophy has ever held true. And what we're seeing today, at least in 2018, is that there's different reasons why a customer wants to be in public cloud or private cloud or co-location. And we see that kind of existing really for a very, very long time. And that's why we've kind of taken an approach around this hybrid approach, which is we don't want to be a hammer looking for a nail and showing co-location as the only solution to your IT infrastructure needs. We want to be able to offer a menu of kind of broad sector of products that then we can help the customer think through what workloads, what data sets, what use cases make the most sense in public cloud, private cloud, or co-location.
Yeah, and I think you've seen data center operators really work to position themselves to have the knowledge and expertise to serve the customer's needs as they have broadened to an extent. Being able to say, hey, we can provide power, space, and cooling if that's what you need, but we also have managed services. We have a cloud platform, or we can directly connect you to cloud providers. And so you mentioned the word hybrid, and I think that describes somewhat. I believe we're kind of in this hybrid IT age, and I think that will continue. But do you see that growing as far as companies coming to you saying, "Hey, I need this, but I also need X, Y, and Z"? Okay.
Oh no, that's why. So let me just circle back to kind of your question before around kind of the content. So the cloud and content guys. So I mean, it's no secret that over the last 2 years, the big five, Facebook, Google, Amazon, AWS, and they've really driven a lot of the absorption, a lot of the leasing in this market, right? And it's not a surprise when you look at AWS. They released their numbers a few weeks ago. I mean, they grew 40% year over year. I mean, they're a $20 billion business growing at 40% a year. It's absolutely astounding, right? But when you peel back from there, the reality is that the enterprise space, they're still going to need co-location. They're still going to need, different types of solutions. And we specifically, I told you earlier, we want to be really close to our customers. And when you start seeing RFPs where they're asking you in the RFP, do you do managed services? Some of them are, and some of them are even, we don't even know if we want to do managed services, but we know that in the future we're going to.
Yes,
and
totally.
we want to pick a provider today that we know will be able to meet those needs.
Yes.
I've had these conversations dozens of times. So that's what gives us the conviction behind our strategy. And then our sector has decided to pursue it in very, many different ways. I mean, some of our public competitors who are REITs, and really our space and power players, you know, you go to their website and you'd be forgiven if you thought you were reading about a hybrid player, right?
Sure.
Because that word is all over their website.
Yeah.
But what that really means to them is, oh, we're going to introduce you to this third-party guy, or we're going to introduce you to this person that's going to get you to AWS. And listen, I think that solution makes sense for the most sophisticated organizations that have the bandwidth to be able to evaluate all three of those different buying decisions.
And traditionally, that list of sophisticated groups is very small when you look at the total market. Yeah.
But you know, we think that the kind of the bread and butter, the mid-sized enterprises are going to gravitate towards a solution and towards service providers that can offer that kind of with a single throat to choke, as we like to say, on a single MSA with a single kind of aggregated spend. And we think that is the more logical way that this industry evolves.
Yeah, and you hit on something that I think is so critical today for companies that are looking at who to partner with. And that is, so if you're a company and you're trying to figure out your IT solution, you've got to think about 3 to 5 years from now, and you've got to think about the unknowns that you might not need today, but you better partner with somebody who knows what to do if you do need those services. Because once you invest the time, energy, and effort to deploy, or migrate your IT solution into, with the data center operator, you're going to be there a while, traditionally.
Exactly.
I mean, you can leave, but it can be challenging too. So making sure you're with someone that can help you, I think, through the trenches of, we don't know the future, but we know that cloud could be part of our solution moving forward. We know we might need managed services. You've got to evaluate that now versus 2 years in and not having, the knowledge that they can do that.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the way we view it, and that's the way we've positioned the company.
Yeah. So you're aware of this because y'all were a part of it, but 2017 was a breakout year from M&A activity as it relates to the data center industry. So I'd just like your thoughts on that. Do you think 2018 will be as active? And why is there so much M&A activity taking place today in our business? What's driving that today?
So I think there's a couple things. Number one, financially, these businesses, economy of scale is really important, right? And if you think about any of these other sectors that we talked about, like wireless or wireline or fiber, or cable, right? They all started the same way as the data center sector started, which is a lot of different players, right? And then over time, they've consolidated into kind of more of these constellations of companies, right? So there's a financial driver behind that consolidation. Scale is important from a financial perspective. Scale is also important from a customer perspective, right? Customers have requirements, and the larger customers have requirements that are geographic, right? And, it wasn't very long ago, 5 years ago, when there was a lot of data center operators that operated in one market or had one data center. And it was extremely, normal for a larger enterprise to contract with that single market data center operator. But I think, as these enterprises have gotten more sophisticated, they're also looking for a partner that can satisfy their geographic needs. And then the third thing is just there's a lot of money coming into the sector, right? So the data center sector has attracted, significant inflows of capital from what are traditionally non-technology investors and that are more real estate investors, right? And that's why the top 5 public data center operators are all REITs, and the REITs investor group is willing to, is willing to accept a lower rate of return than, let's say, a technology investor that has to deal with technology risk. So that's driven obviously multiples up. It's brought in a lot of the dry powder and has kind of fueled this M&A that's happened over the last couple of years. I think I don't think it's going to slow down. I think that it will continue. Is 18 going to be more than 17? That's hard to say, but I think it would be pretty easy to say that the long-term trend is going to be towards continual consolidation.
Yeah. How many, when a data center user comes to DataBank with a requirement, how many of them, are focused on this location? I'm in Dallas, but I need to know how you can serve our needs in, Northern Virginia or Minneapolis or Seattle or Salt Lake. How many are coming with, that question about multi-geography requirements?
Yeah, the multi-market question comes up more from the perspective of they're at the point where they realize they have to have a backup site.
Yes.
So there's probably a smaller amount of players that kind of need co-location in multiple markets because they need to satisfy local constituencies in those markets, other than obviously the cloud and content guys. On the enterprise side, it really is about wanting to have a production location in one market and a secondary site in another market. That is really a conversation that you have all the time at this point. And then, like I said, there still are players that want to be in multiple geographies because there's legitimate business needs to do that.
Yeah. So if you think about where DataBank is right now, and this is actually a fun question, one of the advantages of being not the biggest player is that you're more nimble. Exactly. But one of the challenges with getting bigger is it's harder to be nimble. Exactly. So, sitting where you sit, what are the keys to making sure that you can grow the company the way you need to grow it and get the business you all need to acquire, but also keep the company nimble enough to meet the needs of your customers?
That's a very, very tough question to answer. Look, I think there's no magic bullet to that. Obviously, we want to continue to expand. We want to continue to attract great people. Ultimately, it's as simple as having, great local market managers that keep the bureaucracy out of kind of the customer engagement model. We've gone from 3 markets to 8 markets in 12 months. Yeah. And that's been challenging to kind of, to keep everything running as smoothly as possible. But ultimately, I think it's about, the focus of the executive team and staying as close as possible to your customers. If you sit there and really listen to your customers and talk to your customers, they're going to tell you what you're doing right and what you're not doing right. And as long as you have that ear to the ground, I think that's the way to kind of self-correct yourself as you're trying to scale. But that's a really good question, and anyone that tells you it's easy is I think is probably embellishing a little bit.
What when you think about the users that you'll have as it relates to compliance, talk about how maybe that's changed over the last 3 to 5 years and the importance behind I think not only understanding the compliance needs of customers that you have, but then being able to go on the back end and make sure that you're not just, saying, hey, we're PCI compliant or we're HIPAA compliant or whatever those things are, but going through that process and making sure when they engage with you and sign, a transactional deal with you all, you can deliver those needs.
That's a great question. And that's a great question leading into, what's changing in our sector, right? Mm-hmm. So our most recent acquisition was Edge Hosting, which was a managed services business out of Baltimore. Okay. And one of the main reasons we kind of were attracted to that business was because of their focus on security and compliance. So, and why that, and how they do that differently. So DataBank now has a chief information security officer. Okay. I never would have envisioned in one of the kind of businesses that I've run in a telecommunications, internet infrastructure business, that we would need a chief information security officer, or someone that is eminently qualified to assess, logical and physical security and devise a plan to ensure that, our customers' infrastructure is protected. So we actually just announced last month that he's going to be the CISO, as we say, for DataBank. And we have a dedicated team of a half dozen security and compliance engineers who really kind of put a security and compliance wrapper around all our major product sets, which we put as, co-location product set, our network kind of product stack, and then our managed service stack. And it's extremely important for customers. I'll give you a perfect example that just came up this week. We have a large managed services customer who called up our CTO and asked if he and the CISO could come to a sales call that they're having with a very large corporate that would like double the size of their business, because that very large corporate is concerned about kind of the security model of their platform, of our customer's platform, and they believe that having our CISO there will ensure that the prospect feels that it's a good place to kind of do business with. So without a doubt, we see that as an area that is going to be increasingly important, and I think there's ways you can kind of embed those security features and those compliance features into your product offerings that are more than just a shield on a website. And that's really what we're trying to do and kind of have done. We expose a lot of these kind of security capabilities in our portal. We also kind of expose our compliance capabilities in our portal. So what we've done is created functionality in our portal that allows our customers to more easily stay in compliance, and for us to update them about all the things that we need to do to ensure that they stay in compliance. So it's about facilitating kind of this, this need that the modern world has put out as everything moves to the cloud, as all this personal information moves to the cloud, government information, health information, obviously financial information. I mean, we see compliance as increasing in complexity, and we want to have kind of a systematic way to kind of address that.
When you think about the companies, the verticals that you just mentioned, financial, healthcare, technology, professional services, these different industry verticals, and where the opportunity, I mean, not just for DataBank, but the industry. I was at an event, I think last week, and someone said, "Hey, is there a group that is behind the others? Is there maybe more opportunity in one of these industry vertical sectors than the others?" How would you answer that? I mean, where do you feel like there is a group that's had a harder time, outsourcing their IT infrastructure than others?
Well, no, I would kind of reverse that back to our earlier question about why is there still 65% of corporate infrastructure behind their four walls? That's one of the big reasons, right? Security and compliance, because they feel like in someone else's environment, they're not going to be able to be as secure and as compliant as an environment. I think, finance and healthcare. Healthcare is a sector that is now rapidly growing from a kind of digitalization perspective, and doctors are notoriously bad technologists, so there's obviously a huge ecosystem growing up to kind of fill that need. While financial organizations, almost by definition, have always been technology-driven organizations. A lot of what drives finance is technology, high-frequency trading, and all the kind of systems that underpin risk management and things like that. So I don't think there's any one sector that's behind the other. I think that's kind of a broad-based kind of requirement, and one that has retarded the exporting of these enterprise workloads. And again, the more we can do to make those types of users comfortable, that they can have that same level of control and security inside our facility as opposed to their facility, means that that should propel continued growth for the sector. Right?
So if you think about DataBank's portfolio, and when I first thought about DataBank, I always thought kind of center of the country, because it was Dallas, Minneapolis, and then Kansas City. So there's obviously been some expansions, which you mentioned earlier. But talk to me about you're in some larger markets, and then you're in some secondary markets. As you think about the greater vision for the company, and I'm not asking you to give away any trade secrets, but where do you think you'll focus from a geography perspective? I mean, will you continue to kind of stay on the path of, hey, let's find areas that are in smaller markets, but with, good density of people that would drive, kind of more edge requirements? Or do you feel like we've got to stand up, some locations in some larger markets to continue to kind of complete our portfolio?
Yeah, great question. And the answer is, more than likely, number one, when we look to expand to another market like Atlanta, right? We underwrote the Atlanta expansion in early 2016. And the way we did that is, we looked at the characteristics of that marketplace. I mean, we want to look for a market where the competitive dynamic is favorable, where the supply-demand dynamic is favorable. And obviously, in early 16, that was before the switch announcement, before the DLR.
Yeah.
I mean, there's been a lot of announcements in Atlanta in the last. Been hot, right? So hot Atlanta has gotten hot, and obviously we went into that market with a partnership with Georgia Tech, where Georgia Tech is our anchor customer on kind of a purpose-built facility in downtown Atlanta. So we already felt that was kind of a differentiated entry strategy into the market. But when we look at markets, we look for good characteristics around kind of supply demand, around enterprise outsourcing, around kind of population centers that could be attractive for cloud and content. And typically, the good thing about today's world is, unlike the bubble era, in the bubble era, the reason things got carried away is people, liked what they were doing and then decided, you know what, we're going to go plant 10 flags in 10 markets where we have no business today. And we're just going to find our way to market share. And obviously that did not work. And, what we see today is a much more rational market that you don't see a lot of people just building a brand new greenfield data center in arbitrary market.
And I think that's hard sometimes for the investment world to understand. We get a lot of questions about, is there oversupply, and what is, so-and-so's building 1 million square feet, and one of the things we try to do is help them understand that's an announcement. Correct. But the reality is, like, they're building a 100,000 square foot building 10%. with 2 megawatts, and so trying to help the market. And some of that's just market maturity.
Correct.
And I always laugh because there seems to be some inefficiencies in our market, and it's funny because our market is the one that drives business efficiency. It serves the business growing and being more efficient and using technology. So it's a bit ironic to me. But so how, when you think about international growth and how do you serve client needs that say, hey, we have a need in Europe, or we have a need somewhere outside of the U.S. How do you serve that today? And then is there a future plan from an international perspective, and how do you kind of process all of that? What really makes sense?
Yeah, I think we don't really have international ambitions right now. We see a lot of runway in kind of the existing markets we're in, and in other markets that are similar to those. I think if you look at the path of the public guys, I mean, CoreSite isn't international yet, right? QTS isn't international yet, and CyrusOne just became international. So I think that proves that you can grow a very large business by remaining a domestic player. I think for the customers that have those type of international requirements, they're obviously massively sophisticated. They're global organizations. You don't really lose a lot of cred if they need to go to an Equinix or a DLR to get into those markets. So it hasn't been a source of drag on our business. Obviously, it seems obvious as the larger you get, the more you find those types of opportunities, and the more it makes sense to kind of broaden your geography internationally. But I think the U.S. market, the North America market, kind of including Canada, is a very deep growing market, and we see a lot of opportunity by just staying there.
Okay, so when you think about the next 3 to 5 years, what are you most excited about within our space, within the opportunities with current customers that you have? Just what gets you most excited, as a CEO of a growing data center company?
Well, it goes back to the question I started in the beginning, which I really think we're at the beginning of something that we don't even know what it's going to be, but it's going to be big. And what gets me excited is what I like to call the net new workloads, right? At the end of the day, if you think about the data center demand, it's been mainly driven by what we've talked about today, enterprise kind of outsourcing, which is kind of traditional compute, and then cloud and content. But what we are starting to see is kind of these new workloads that didn't exist 5 years ago, right? Things around kind of deep learning and artificial intelligence, right? Autonomous vehicles. My view is that there's going to be a whole nother wave of kind of applications that need to run inside data centers that haven't even shown up yet, don't even know about and are going to propel the next wave of demand in this sector. So that's the thing that gets us excited as operators and investors in the business.
Well, it is a fascinating business to be in. I tell people all the time that we're connecting with them, like, there's just no slowdown in sight. And I don't mean that everything's going to go, crazy berserk in the next, number of years, but the way we're depending on technology, the way businesses are transforming themselves to be more dependent upon technology for their business, it's hard to imagine that great days wouldn't be ahead. So thank you for sitting down with us. And so if you want to learn more about Raul's company, DataBank, you can just go to their website. It's databank.com. There's some great information there. And if you want to learn more about DataCenterHawk, you can join us at our website at DataCenterHawk.com. Thanks for watching.
Thanks, Dave.
You bet.